During World War II, the Battle of the Skies raged, and I'm going through 7 engines I believe changed the war and the future of aeroplanes. The reciprocating engine reached its finest form during the Second World War. Greater and greater engine power was the prime demand, as aeroplanes tried to outmatch their rivals. This attempt to outmatch one's adversaries was a struggle for survival. Enormous technical progress was made in the development of power plants. Between 1939 and 1945, the power generated by engines was nearly doubled. At the beginning of the 1930s, the average radial inline or V engine generated about 700 horsepower. Special racing engines were a different case altogether. But for example, the first Rolls-Royce Merlin in 1934 generated 720 horsepower. But 2 years later, the engine provided 990 horsepower. By the time of the Battle of Britain, Merlins were generating 1030 horsepower, and by 1945 the Merlin was almost at 2000 horsepower level, while the Griffon went beyond that mark. This is all more remarkable when we consider that the basic structure of the reciprocating engine had not changed since 1918. What did change was technology. Great Britain and Germany led Europe in this development. New materials and new techniques were introduced, and the reciprocating engine was perfected and brought to its highest level. Internal competitive companies helped with development. In Great Britain there was Bristol and the Rolls-Royce companies. In Germany, Junkers, Daimler-Benz and BMW, each with their own merits but all competing to create the best engine. It was in Germany and Britain that the reciprocating engine reached its upper limit and finally gave way to its successor, the jet engine. The Bristol Mercury, 1927. The Mercury was developed by the British Aeroplane Company in 1925. This was the second engine that Bristol built. It was to replace their 1920 design's Bristol Jupiter, which was reaching the end of its lifespan. Although the Mercury initially failed to attract much interest, the Air Ministry eventually funded 3 prototypes, and it became another winner for the designer Roy Fedden. It had the same general structure as its predecessor. It was a 9-cylinder radial engine with a reduction gear. Power ranged between 725 and 905 horsepower. Although the Mercury design was an old one, the engine was used in several aeroplanes during the Second World War. The Mercury's smaller size was aimed at fighter use, and it powered the Gloucester Gauntlet and its successor, the Gloucester Gladiator. It was intended that another engine developed by Roy Fedden, the larger Pegasus, would be for bombers, but as the power ratings of both engines rose, the Mercury found itself being used in almost all roles. Perhaps its most famous use was in the twin-engine light bomber, the Bristol Blenheim. A total of 20,700 were built between 1939 and 1945 alone. The Mercury was also the first British aero engine to be approved for use with variable pitch propellers. Rolls-Royce Merlin, 1936. This famous Rolls-Royce engine was developed from the engine that was first produced for Schneider Cup racing. It was 27-litre, 12-cylinder liquid-cooled V-engine. Rolls-Royce designed the engine and first ran it in 1933 as a private venture. Initially known as the PV-12, after several modifications, the first production variants of the PV-12 were completed in 1936, and it was later called Merlin following the company's convention of naming its piston aero engines after birds of prey. One of the most successful aircraft engines of World War II era, some 50 versions of the Merlin were built by Rolls-Royce in Derby, Crewe and Glasgow, as well by Ford of Britain at their Trafford Park factory near Manchester. Its power increased from 990 horsepower of the prototypes to almost 2,000 in the final models. More than 150,000 engines were built, and they powered all the most important British aeroplanes in the war, including the Hurricane and the Spitfire fighters. the Lancaster Bomber and the twin-engine Mosquito. The Merlin remains most closely associated with the Spitfire and Hurricane though, although the majority of its production run was for the 4-engine Avro Lancaster heavy bomber. Bristol Hercules 1936. This was one of the most powerful radial engines of the war. The Hercules was a 14-cylinder radial engine that was produced in a variety of models, designed again by Sir Roy Fedden and produced by the Bristol Aeroplane Company. Its basic power went from 1,375 horsepower in the early models to 1,800 horsepower in the final models. It powered such famous aeroplanes as the Lancaster, the Halifax, the Stirling and the Beaufighter. It first appeared in 1936 and 57,400 of these engines were built during the war. Type 417 Wellington B Mark III featured the 1,375 horsepower Bristol Hercules 3 or 4 engine, and it became mainstays of Bomber Command through 1941. A total of 1,517 were built at Chester and Blackpool. Even after the war, the Hercules also saw use in civilian designs, culminating in 735 and 737 engines for such as the Handley Page Hastings C1 and C3 and the Bristol Freighter. It was considered to be one of the more reliable aircraft engines of the era. Junkers Jumo 211. This engine was designed in 1937. It became one of the most popular German power plants in the first years of the war. 12-cylinder supercharged liquid-cooled 60-degree inverted V-piston aircraft engine with direct injection and supercharging. Several production models were built and power raised by 50% in the last models built. The Jumo engine was primarily used in bombers and became the major bomber engine of the war, in no such part due to Junkers also building a majority of the bombers then in such use, such as Junkers owned Ju-87 and Ju-88, and was fitted to the Heinkel's H series, including Heinkel's HE-111 medium bomber. A major upgrade was started by Junkers in 1940, adapting the Jumo 211 with a pressurized cooling system. Under pressure, the boiling point of water increases, allowing the engine to run hotter. This, in turn, allows the given amount of cooling fluid to carry away more energy. As a result, the engine could run at a higher power setting with smaller radiator system. The resulting 211E proved to be able to run much higher power settings without overheating, so it was quickly followed by the 211F, which included a strengthened crankshaft and a more efficient supercharger. It was the most produced German aero engine of the war, with over 70,000 engines completed. BMW 801 1940. This was the first high-performance radial engine developed in Germany after the outbreak of the war. It was a 14-cylinder engine with direct injection and supercharging. The first models generated 1,600 horsepower, and the final models reached almost 2,300 horsepower. And as a result, the 801 became known as the power plant for the famous Focke-Wulf FW190. The BMW 801 radio also pioneered the use of what today would be designated an engine control unit. The Kommando-Gerät engine management system took over the operation of several aviation engine management control parameters of the era, allowing proper operation of the engine with just one throttle lever. Several minor advances were worked into the design, including the use of sodium-cooled valves and a direct fuel injection system. It was the most produced radial engine of Germany in World War II, with more than 61,000 built. Daimler-Benz DB 605 1940. This engine was a 12-cylinder inverted V model with direct injection and supercharging. It generated 1,475 horsepower at 2,800 RPM. The Daimler-Benz DB605 was probably the most famous of the Daimler-Benz line that began with the 1937 DB600. Other famous engines in the series were the DB601 and the DB603. When the Daimler-Benz DB600 made its first appearance, it marked a significant step ahead in engine design. It was the first commercial engine to have direct injection instead of the traditional carburettor. The Daimler-Benz powered the Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters from the very beginning. The DB601, which generated 1050 horsepower under normal conditions, gave a foretaste of its possibilities in 1937, when one was modified to generate 1630 horsepower for short periods. This modified engine powered a Messerschmitt Bf 109 to a world speed record of about 382 miles per hour. The DB605 appeared in 1940 and reached a maximum output of 2000 horsepower. The DB600s, together with the Junker Jumo and the BMW radios, were the leading German engines designed and constructed for the Second World War. These engines were outfitted to the Bf 110 and the Me 210C heavy fighters. 42,400 of these engines were built. The Rolls-Royce Griffon, 1942. The Rolls-Royce Griffon is a British 37-litre 60-degree V12 liquid-cooled aero engine designed and built by Rolls-Royce Limited. In keeping with the company convention, the Griffon was named after a bird of prey. Design work on the Griffon started in 1938 at the request of the Fleet Air Arm, for use in new aircraft designs such as the Fairey Firefly. In 1939 it was also decided that the engine could be adapted for its use in the Spitfire. 4 were used in the Avro Shackleton. This was the direct successor to the Merlin engine and retained its basic design of 12 cylinders in a V formation. It was water-cooled and supercharged by means of a compression of one of 2 stages and 2 speeds. The engine did not go into production until the early 1940s. Great Britain made extensive use of this type of engine during the Second World War. Power increased from 1730 horsepower to 2300 horsepower in the final version. The Griffon was last in the line of V12 aero engines to be produced by the Rolls-Royce, with production ceasing in 1955. Griffon engines remain in the Royal Air Force service today, with the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and power the last remaining airworthy Avro Shackleton. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked the video, click like. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and ring that bell and you'll be notified on any new videos we put on the channel. Any questions, any comments, put them in the box below and I do reply, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.